back. This is Christian Gordon-Pullar. I'm with Ryan Abbott and James Tumbridge. The last time that we met together, I briefly introduced Ryan, an incredible list of talents from doctor to lawyer across the US and California, but has also written The Reasonable Robot and has starred in and performed across many jurisdictions in the Thaler cases, also known as DABUS, looking at the inventorship for AI systems in both patents and copyright. And James Tumbridge, a partner at Keystone Law, who is also a common councilman at the City of London and a partner at Keystone Law, specializing in intellectual property, litigation, arbitration, and employee issues. So welcome back, James and Ryan. In this session, we're going to focus a little bit from passing on from the last one, where we discussed at the very end the idea of AI inventorship, but also the idea of balancing the creative content owners' rights, individual rights, not just as copyright owners, but also inventors in a patent sense, with the need to promote technology, to recognize that technology is advancing at great pace. And we're now going to move on exactly to the next step that we were briefly discussing at the end of the last podcast, where we're going to look a little bit at the impact. Let's call it tax transparency and the economic shockwave, because I suppose that'll make someone smile. But we're really looking at AI as a huge benefit to societies, just as in the past you saw Brazil completely jump fixed line telephony to mobile telephony. That also happened in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in many countries that really advanced as a result of a technology leap without needing or paying for the infrastructure that was before. So today is the same thing happening with artificial intelligence. Should we be looking as policymakers, as policy influencers, as people who actually advise clients on the current state of the law and the likely trend in the future, should we be looking to advocate a recognition of AI as potential inventors, to recognize that in many cases inventors will not be able to speak to the patent offices if indeed the AI created it and the human being knew very little or understood very little about it? How will that play out? But if you take that to a natural conclusion at the other end of the scale, what do we think about a world where possibly the AIs will become the inventors? The humans will train the AIs who will then do everything better and faster. That could be great. And what do governments think about that from a social benefit perspective, the social contract between the benefits to individuals creating it, but also the benefits to governments deriving taxes, payroll taxes, and other taxes from the fact that people pay taxes, and often AI, and certainly in this case, without ownership and inventorship, without rights, AI can't be charged a fee for anything that it makes. And perhaps the companies that control and own them will need to do something in return to recognize that if people don't pay payroll taxes, perhaps the companies that run the AI need to balance the books. So some thoughts on that. Let's start with James this time.
Wow. I mean, in that run through, Christian, lots of great thoughts, but it meant that I've got about 15 questions that I think you want answered. So I'm going to reformulate. And I'm going to do it on this basis, that I think what you were really going through is a much bigger societal question about automation. It goes beyond AI. Let me just put it in a brief context of what I describe as the difference between real world jobs and all the stuff we're talking about. So take haulage drivers. At the moment around the world, hundreds of thousands of people have a living driving vehicles, delivering goods. If we were to have automated vehicles, perhaps enabled because AI is clever enough to have them drive around safely, what are those hundreds of thousands of people going to do? And that creates a real societal challenge, because up until now, generally speaking, we do have corporations and they pay some taxes because they have rights and they do things, they generate profits, but people do as well. If we are moving in a direction where, particularly in the Western societies, you've got these big leaps forward, and your leap forward example of Brazil is interesting because I'm reminded that Japan has bullet trains. The United Kingdom does not. The original inventors and engineers to enable those were here, but the British government didn't have the investment. There wasn't a private. Japan didn't have to. They were building their railways at a different point in time. And
Yeah.
you often find that you have those leap forwards. But here we're talking about a huge shift. So I'll give you one final example. In Victorian England, in the industrial age, before clocks were commonplace, the people used to have a job where they would knock on your window and your door and wake you up. So one person had a clock, and they'd make money by waking up the rest of the street. But eventually, clocks became cheap. We didn't need that anymore. So jobs do evolve, but it's hard to guess what's going to replace hundreds of thousands of jobs that were involved with driving vehicles or typing documents or whatever. So I think to this, where do we go? Well, I think there's a difference between what we might talk about to our clients and what policymakers, in a true sense, need to think of. Policymakers need to start thinking about the concept of different taxation. Taxation on physical presence is no longer as straightforward. Taxation based purely on employment may not be sufficient. So it may have to be a different kind of approach to corporate and automation in taxation terms to deliver services that people might expect. But perhaps you then get into the world of universal income, where you say, okay, well, everybody gets a certain amount of money, but you're expected to volunteer at the library or something. What is the trade-off for the fact that we work this way? And the very final point I will add to all of this is that, for me, I suspect that clients tend to mean private enterprise. I do some government work. We're not talking about that today. And that tends to be a case of me saying to them, okay, well, if you're going to spend all this money inventing and creating, can we protect it? Can you earn back your income through intellectual property? So there's a lot that needs to evolve.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and one of the things, Ryan, that you and I have briefly discussed once over dinner was the concept of taxation, and you mentioned this in The Reasonable Robot. I think that an AI output tax, or indeed AI-generated IP being viewed in a different way, recognizing that AI will probably eventually be recognized as inventor where necessary, or be part of computer-generated works, as we discussed in the last section. What do you think about both the balance of granting certain rights, let's call them rights, to AI, as in to be named as an inventor, or indeed in future any other rights, that commensurately get balanced with a need for that to balance the losses of payroll taxes or whatever? We'll call that a services AI tax or something else. Have you encountered discussions along those lines, or do you have any thoughts on it?
I think it's hugely interesting questions. James has a much better grasp of history than I do, but very long-standing concerns that computers were going to put people out of jobs in the 60s. John F. Kennedy said this was one of the leading challenges, and indeed, they've put people out of jobs. Historically, though, they've resulted in more jobs and in more productivity for people. So if you look at history, AI hasn't put everyone out of a job. A lot of people think this time's going to be different. Sam Altman and Elon Musk say, within a few years, we'll have artificial general intelligence, a machine that can do any intellectual task a person can do. They say many interesting things, so I don't necessarily believe that is true, but there certainly seems to me a shift in people thinking about what AI can do. And people have again said AI is going to replace lawyers for 20 years, hasn't done that yet. Certainly has replaced some of the things we do, like discovery has, or information exchange review has totally changed. But also, my students at Surrey are all using ChatGPT to write their exams. The exams have gotten much better, but I do worry about what they're going to do when they get jobs and someone says, well, if you're just having ChatGPT write a legal memo for me, what do I need you for? I can ask ChatGPT to write a legal memo for me. On the haulage driver point, this is a good one. And, AI is not there yet, but, we do in California now have totally self-driving Waymo cars that take us around. And, they keep getting better. Human taxi drivers don't. So it may be that things really change. And historically, the approach has been, well, what we should do, though we don't always as a society, is provide more benefits to people rendered, technologically unemployed, retrain them to do things that AI can't do well. There may not be such a category of things so much in the future. And what do we do there? And as James said, well, maybe one solution is we all get universal basic income. I think that is an appealing solution if we get to that stage of technology, because, if we can have inventive AI that is so much better than a human being, it makes no sense to go to a human being. If we want a new drug and we can just go to ChatGPT 15 and say, design a better drug just for me, formulate it and put it in me. And it works very effectively. We shouldn't have to rely on kind of less effective systems than that. In Brazil, they used to have elevator attendants, to provide people with jobs instead of elevator panels. And, that wasn't a good system. I would never think about granting an AI a right. I don't think anyone's kind of seriously, advocated for that. It's never been part of the cases. The issue is whether we want to protect AI generated output. And listing the AI as an inventor wasn't a right for an AI. It was just being transparent about how an invention was made. And it was, also to take people for claiming credit for work they haven't done and to make sure ownership is made correctly. But, if AI is going to put lots and lots of people out of jobs, the way it looks that might happen right now is that, 3 people in the world are going to become quintillionaires and a lot of normal people are not going to have means of supporting themselves. And historically, one of the ways we've dealt with that sort of thing is by having, changes to the tax system. And this might be something like, well, if AI is making all the money in the world and putting people out of jobs, we're going to tax the use of AI or AI systems to provide some offset for that. And it might be something even more general, which is that we increase capital taxes and decrease labor taxes. Because there's also some weird incentives about how AI works with taxes, which is if you have an AI doing haulage work, you don't have to make national insurance contributions for using AI like that. But if you hire a human being to do it, then you do have to pay. So the tax system actually discourages human labor at the moment. So these are all, I think, very exciting issues.
Yes, very interesting issues. And just to sort of close out, and we have a few minutes left, a couple of final thoughts, I suppose, on that balance between maybe what we need to do is reinvent the ecosystem of the way we look at services that are either consumed by AI or that are provided by AI at the other end of the scale. In other words, you look at both some form of fee or licensing, or not a tax, but an equivalent of a licensing fee to those who train the AI at the beginning, so that is the content that AI consumes to become better, to continue to be better for those that are obviously still contributing to thought leadership. And I'm pretty sure that'll continue for at least a few more years. And at the other end, of course, as you say, where AI has perhaps disintermediated people in the supply chain, to use James's example, haulage drivers and logistics suppliers, then of course there might be an output tax because effectively that's being substituted for. And I think governments might actually like that balance because their books might also balance and governments may not shut down for days or weeks. James, final thought?
Yeah, I think that this is what makes this a fascinating conversation. We are genuinely aware this time that there is a technological shift that will have huge societal changes. You've got lots of people excited that they might be able to deliver better outcomes for less investment. But these good things probably have an offset, and we need people to be thinking about it now, because one of the worst things in Western governments is that they're always behind the curve of technology. So I want them thinking a little bit now, otherwise we will never be ready.
Absolutely. Again, thank you, James. Thank you, Ryan Abbott. We'll see you soon.